Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Donald Trump's flagship policy of extreme vetting of immigrants and a temporary travel ban for citizens of 7 mainly Muslim countries was stopped in its tracks this weekend. On Friday, a federal judge ruled that the ban should be lifted and that it could be unconstitutional. That prompted President Trump to fire off a series of tweets criticising what he says was, quote, a terrible decision by, quote, a so-called judge, as he ordered the Justice Department to challenge the ruling. Now the Federal Appeals Court has rejected his request to reinstate the ban immediately. It wants to hear the case in full. That will start on Monday afternoon. Yesterday, I spoke to Sebastian Gorka, Deputy Assistant to Donald Trump in the White House. I asked him if the confusion over the travel ban was a sign that the president's 2-week-old administration is already in chaos.
There is no chaos. You really shouldn't believe the spin. The facts speak for themselves. 109 people on Saturday were mildly inconvenienced by having their entry into the United States delayed out of 325,000. So let's not get carried away with the left-wing media bias and spin.
Hold on, 60 to 90,000 people who had visas giving them entry to the United States, these visas are no longer valid.
That's another issue. You need to listen to what I'm saying. The people who entered on the day that the executive order was implemented were 109 people out of 325. Whether people who weren't traveling to America were affected is another matter. So there is no chaos to comment on.
Let's move away from domestic issues and look at the international picture. Following Iran's latest missile test, National Security Advisor Flynn said the US was, quote, putting Iran on notice. What does that actually mean?
It means that we have a new president and we're not going to facilitate the rise of one of the most dangerous nations in the world. We're completely jettisoning this incredibly naive and dangerous policy of the Obama administration to try and make the Shiite dictatorial theocracy some kind of counterbalance to extremist Sunni groups in the region, and that they cannot continue to behave in the way they've behaved for the last 30 years. It's a very simple message.
So are there any multilateral alliances that Mr. Trump would like to strengthen?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. If we're looking at the region, if you listen to what President Trump has said, and specifically to also the speeches of General Flynn, his national security advisor, we are incredibly vested in seeing our Sunni allies in the region come together in a real coalition. The so-called vaunted 65 or 66 nation coalition against ISIS that was created under the Obama administration was a Potemkin village. There was no coalition. I was there in theater, I saw it for myself. But we want to help our Sunni allies, especially the Egyptians, especially the Jordanians, the Emiratis, come together in a real partnership to take the fight to ISIS and groups like Al-Qaeda.
But there's not a formal multilateral alliance with these various countries. Which of the existing, the formal multilateral alliances does Mr. Trump want to strengthen?
Well, if you're specifically talking about NATO, it's clear that we are committed to NATO, but we wish to see a more equitable burden sharing amongst the nations that are simply not spending enough on their own defense. So the gentleman's agreement of 2% of GDP really has to be stuck to, unlike I think it's only 6 nations that reach that standard today out of the almost 30.
So he does want to strengthen NATO then?
Oh, he believes absolutely in that. NATO is the most successful modern military alliance, and as one of its founders, we are committed to it. Yes, there is no question there. Again, you mustn't believe the spin and the hype.
EU leaders now see the Trump administration as a threat, up there with Russia, China, terrorism. What's your response to that?
I laugh. I have to laugh. I mean, really, you know, the idea that the nation that came to the salvation of Europe twice in the 20th century, in World War I and in World War II, then was central to the defeat of the totalitarian ideology of communism, is now a threat to Europe. I mean, it's not even worth commenting on. It's so asinine.
Would it matter to the Trump administration if the European Union broke up?
The United States is very interested in the best relations possible with all the nations of the EU. Whether the European Union wishes to stay together or not is up to the nations of the European Union.
I understand that, but I was just wondering what the US view would be. Until Mr. Trump, EU foreign policy was quite consistent in wanting to see the EU survive, prosper, and even become more integrated. Now that doesn't seem to be the case, so I ask again, would it matter to the Trump administration if the EU broke up?
I will say yet again, it is in the interest of the United States to have the best relations possible with our European allies, our European partners, whether that's in the formation of the EU or if the EU by itself suffers some kind of internal issues. That is up to the European nations and not something that we're going to comment on.
Just listening to that answer, though, it would seem that this particular president's preference is to deal with individual nation states rather than multilateral institutions. Is that fair?
I don't think so. There's never been an unequivocal statement to that effect by the president.
And he doesn't share his strategist, Steve Bannon, someone that you know, his well-professed view that the 21st century should see a return to nation states rather than growing existing multilateral ways.
I think it's fair to say that we have problems with political elites that don't take the interests of the populations they represent into account. That's why Brexit happened. I think that's why Mr. Trump became President Trump. This is a connected phenomena. So it's not about institutions. You're obsessing about institutions. It's about the health of democracy and whether the political elites actually do what is in the interests of the people they represent. That's what we care about.
Given the unpredictability of the new president, you never really know what he's going to do next. Would it be wise for the British Prime Minister to hitch her wagon to his star?
This is really churlish questioning. I mean, really, come on. You don't know what he's going to do next. Listen to what he says, because he actually does what he's going to say. I know this may be shocking to some reporters, but look at his campaign promises and the fact that in the last 15 days we've executed every single one that we could in the time permissible. So there's nothing unpredictable about Donald Trump as president.
Okay, then, well, if we do know what he's going to do next, Dr. Gorka, what is he going to do next?
Continue to make good on his election promises, to make America great again, to make the economy a flourishing economy, and most important of all, from your perspective in the UK, to be the best friend possible to our friends and the worst enemy to our enemies. That's an old Marine Corps phrase, and we tend to live by it.
Dr. Gorka, we thank you for your time. We'll leave it there.
Thank you.
Dr. Gorka there, not really telling us what putting on a RAND notice means, but making it pretty clear that this administration is not going to spend political capital on trying to keep the European Union together, which is a watershed change in American foreign policy. What did you make of Dr. Gorka of the Trump administration?
I mean, I thought he was absolutely fascinating. He's exactly cut from the same cloth as his boss. I thought it was extraordinary listening to him saying everything is going beautifully to plan. But at the end of the day, what they're doing is what people in America voted for Trump to do. If you look at Lord Ashcroft's polling on why America voted for Trump, they went into this with their eyes wide open. And one of the top fears amongst American voters, particularly Republican-leaning ones, is that America's immigration policy is or could be letting in terrorists. So as far as he's concerned, he is doing what he was elected to do.
But isn't this week, and this whole year is turning into a kind of wonderful long lecture series essays on how democracy works at a really fundamental level. I mean, I'm not sure anyone wanted it, but it's what we've got. In the same way we've been talking about judging between a direct democracy of referendum and a parliamentary democracy, the same thing is happening in America with the separation between the executive, the judicial and legislative branches. And actually we're now finding out what the limits of presidential power are. And regardless of the fact that people voted for Trump, they also voted for a whole range of senators, and this judge who's blocked the latest thing was appointed by George W. Bush. They previously appointed him. And I think, everyone's kind of having this so-called George W. Bush. But, I just think it's actually kind of fascinating. We're having all these conversations now that I never thought 5 years ago we would be having such a fundamental level. Has
the media yet worked out how to cover the Trump administration? Or has he got us behaving like headless chickens? He says something incendiary and we all run over to do that. Then when you pick it off, it turns out not to be as incendiary as he thought. And then he's back doing something over, and then we all rush over there. I mean, is he making fools of us?
Which is exactly what he did throughout the entire election campaign, remember? There were so many quick and fast, outrageous comments from Trump on a daily basis. No one single one of them had full news cycle time to be poured over and examined. So I think there is a problem with this. Though he keeps the upper hand, he keeps the agenda, and he keeps on a kind of populist ground. The problem is, it's very easy to campaign like that. If you are governing in a state of semi-hysteria, I wonder how long the American public are really going to be comfortable for that. They don't really want their government to be swirling chaos all the time, as fascinating as it may be on TV.
Be exhausted by it. I'm already exhausted by it. But I've been interviewing White House administration officials since 1976, and that's the first time someone hasn't given me a straight answer on that America supports the EU. That's a different world.
I've been getting away with it all my